Hey guys, Chris Howard here, and I just want to go over one quick verse found in Proverbs. Before I do, it has to do with a friend of mine who got out of $130,000 worth of debt, not overnight, 2 years, but he was stressed and it was putting pressure on him and his family, and they were in, give or take 130. It was over $130,000. He's a contractor, a carpenter who had done a lot of work building houses. The housing market fell, and he was left with all this debt that he owed, like Home Depot and different vendors. And he tried to do everything he could to get out of debt, and he kept running into a brick wall. And people say that the Bible isn't practical. You mean that's can't be applied to everyday life, and I don't agree with that. I'm not here to argue with anybody, but it is actually very, very practical. And not only is the Bible practical, but as you'll find, if you do apply the verses to your particular situation, like debt, marital situation, maybe a child that's struggling with addiction or whatever, you'll find out that it is practical and that it is powerful. And so if we look at Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, and I believe this is going to help you, and I know it's helped me. But it says in verse 5 of Proverbs chapter 3, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Notice it says all, right? So trust in the Lord with all your heart. And that takes time to develop. But I believe after this video, you're going to have a little nugget, little secret to help you develop that. And so trust in the Lord with all your heart and do something else, and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3, verse 5. So two things. Trust God with all your heart and don't lean onto your own understanding. If you're like me, this is where I get into trouble when I start, leaning onto my own understanding. And so my friend had $130,000 worth of debt. And initially he was leaning on his own understanding. He would stretch out papers every night on their kitchen table. And who wouldn't, facing $130,000 worth of extra debt on top of your mortgage and everything else? He was spreading the papers out, using the calculator, beginning to be frustrated, of course, having pressure, being worried, probably applying pressure into the marriage and spilling over into other areas of life, just like the rest of us, it would happen, right? But he changed. He switched up. And so what he did, instead of trying to figure things out on his own, as it says in Proverbs, trust God with all your heart and don't lean on to your understanding. Do something else. And here's where verse 6 comes in. In all your ways. Again, it's all. So it's first, trust God with all your heart. Verse 6, in all your ways, acknowledge God, or in all your ways, acknowledge him. And here's the promise. He shall direct your path. So the first thing I see is it's a conditional promise, right? Conditional promise, meaning like if I said, come to my house, paint my shed, I'll pay you $100. It's conditional. You would have to come to my house, paint my shed, then you would receive the $100, right? So you have to do something first. You have to meet the condition. And here in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, there's a couple conditions for God to direct our path. Just like and I'll tell you in a minute what happened with my friend. So the first thing is trust God with all our heart. The second thing is lean not on our understanding. So trust, lean not on our understanding. Third, acknowledge God in all our ways. And then God's job, he shall direct our path. So that's what my friend did. He came to me and he said, Chris, I threw away my calculator and I stopped trying to figure out all these budgets. And I personally been there, where I written different budgets, over time, and, just kept writing them, trying to figure things out. But he said, I quit doing that. And he goes, and God's going to get me out of debt. And I'm like, really? And I'm trying to encourage him. I want to stand by his side. But I'm like, well, how's God going to get you out of debt? He's like, God's going to get me out of debt, but I don't know how. Meaning I'm not leaning onto my own understanding anymore. I'm trusting God. So he switched from trying to figure things out on his own, leaning on his own understanding, to fully trusting God with all his heart. And that's not the easiest thing to do. I understand that. But that's what my friend did. And over a 2-year period, he kept being awarded different side jobs where other contractors were putting bids in for these jobs. And somehow, some way, through God's mercy, he would get the job, and he would take that money from that extra side job. Yes, he worked a lot, he worked hard, he worked, sometimes 16 hours a day between his regular job and the side job. But guess what? In 2 years' time, he paid off every single vendor. Everybody he owed debt to, he paid them off, and he was debt free and out from underneath that burden. And so, if you apply, because it is very practical, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 to your situation, again, it could be any situation, it doesn't have to be a debt situation, but it can be a debt situation. You apply it, you meet the conditions, you trust God with all your heart. And how would you do that if you're not trusting God? You would just ask God, Lord, I'm not trusting you. You be honest. I need help to trust you. Would you teach me how to trust you? God, of course, will teach you because he wants to be trusted. And then you just go from there. And then you start to acknowledge God in all your ways. How do you do that? Through the means and the mechanism of prayer. You start praying about your burden. Psalm 55:22 says, cast your burden on the Lord and he shall sustain you. So the Bible's all full of this principle of trusting God and sharing our burdens with the Lord. And then the Lord shows up because he sees we're up against a brick wall. We've exhausted all our means of trying to figure it out on our own. And then God comes through and does only what God can do. And he does amazing things. And like in my friend's case, completely out of debt. So I would memorize chapter 3 of Proverbs, verses 5 and 6. I would apply it to the burden that you're facing, and I would trust God with all your heart, and I would wait on God's timing to get through what you're going through and allow God to fulfill his promise and direct your path. Amen. Well, I pray that blesses you. And, if you like this video, give it a like. Maybe share it with a friend who's struggling with some things. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, as we're going to try to put out more videos to encourage you to trust in the Lord. Amen. Well, God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.